I say free, free, you say Palestine. Is that okay? Yeah. Free, free!
Palestine!
Free, free!
Palestine!
Free, free!
Palestine!
Free, free!
Palestine!
Thank you. Well done. You got your voices here. Okay, so I just want to start first of all by reassuring people and making a point because it's so important. This is not a protest against Jewish people. It is so very important that we do not accept the conflation of Judaism and the state of Israel that's committing apartheid against the Palestinian people. So I just want everyone to remember that. The issue is Zionism, which is a political ideology of ethnic supremacy in practice. So please can I just remind people of that. I also just want to say that there are many Israelis trying to make a stand in support of Palestinian rights who also find themselves targeted in a different way. So when I talk about Israel, I talk about the supporters of apartheid and those who are currently undertaking an ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people. Today is the official anniversary of what Palestinians call the Nakba, or in English, the catastrophe. This was when Zionist militia forced 750,000 Palestinians from their homes and land, committed massacres and totally erased over 500 Palestinian villages. But this is not just a moment in history. As I stand here today, 73 years later, this Nakba, this catastrophe, continues as the world watches in silence. It continues in East Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, where Israel at this very moment are forcing Palestinians from their homes, so Israeli settlers, often from Europe, protected by soldiers, can take them over. This is a community who had already lost their homes in 1948. It continues as unarmed Palestinians protesting their ethnic cleansing throughout Palestine are being met with live ammunition. In Jerusalem, we are seeing tens of thousands of Zionist nationalists storming the Temple Mount, where the 1,000-year-old Al-Aqsa Mosque is, which we know to be the third holiest site for Muslims. They're attacking Muslims, and footage can be seen online of thousands of these Zionist thugs cheering and singing as the compound burns. Al-Aqsa Mosque has been attacked by Israeli soldiers who have been shooting Palestinians with rubber-coated steel bullets and tear gas canisters as they were on their knees praying during their most holy month of Ramadan. Christian Palestinian neighbourhoods, and Christians so often get forgotten in this, as well as Muslim neighbourhoods, are being targeted by military vehicles spraying what is called skunk water, a chemical water that smells like sewage and the smell which is impossible to remove from clothes and furniture. In what is now considered Israel proper, in the cities of Haifa, Lit, Jaffa, Akka, we are seeing Palestinians, known there as Arab Israelis, shot and killed as they protest alongside their Israeli comrades. We are seeing Israeli lynch mobs, Zionist lynch mobs, dragging Palestinians from their cars and beating them to a pulp, trying to break into their homes, trashing their businesses and demanding the addresses of Palestinians. These are full-scale pogroms that we have not witnessed since 1948. Before I move on to talking about what is happening at this moment in the 14-year illegally and brutally blockaded Strip Gaza, I just want to talk a little bit about my experiences from when I served as a human rights monitor in Hebron. So these are things that I personally witnessed or happened during my period there. A settler in his car trying to run over two Palestinian toddlers, one of them of about 3 months and the other of 18 months. I managed to grab one of the children as the father managed to grab the other. An unarmed father where I just visited shot in front of his home and left to bleed out on the floor until he died, the military denying the right for him to have emergency aid. A Palestinian child, a these children are tortured, refused access to an appropriate adult, and forced to sign confessions in a language that they do not understand. Another human rights organisation reported that 40% of these children are subject to some form of sexual abuse. The conviction rate in the Israeli military court is 99.74%, underscoring the total sham kangaroo court that it is. Eyewitness settlers violently attacking Palestinians and destroying their shops and their stores. Eyewitnessed Israeli soldiers shooting tear gas canisters at children as they left school, some from kindergarten age upwards. This is only a very small snapshot of what I witnessed and experienced when I was there. A lot of it can be seen in a podcast that I did with my friend Eddie West of Point of Discussion. A couple of weeks ago, the biggest international human rights organisation, Human Rights Watch, confirmed what most of us have known for years, that Israel is guilty of the crime of apartheid, a crime against humanity. But with all this going on, how has our mainstream media been reporting it? As is almost always the case, they cast Israel in the role of victim. The Palestinians portrayed as violent. They talk about Hamas rockets, but not what provokes them being launched. They report the reaction of a tiny minority of Palestinians turning to violent resistance, but not the violent criminal actions that led to it. So as Israel now carpet bombs Gaza, a civilian population in one of the most densely populated areas in the world, a people who've been brutalised and kept in the largest open-air prison, and as one Israeli politician stated, put on a diet, killing men, women and children who have nowhere to hide and no bomb shelters to shelter themselves in. The Israeli Defence Minister Gantz threatens to make Gaza burn. And the media talks about Israel being under attack. The leader of the so-called free world talks about Israel having the right to defend itself. And we have heard similar comments from leaders throughout Europe. But let's be clear on something. You cannot argue defence when you are the occupier, guilty of a crime of apartheid, of ethnic cleansing and implementing genocide. During our occupation, would we have accepted as reasonable anyone who resisted our occupiers being labelled as terrorists? Look at the recent reaction on our island when French fishermen threatened to blockade us. So tell me, who of us would tolerate our children being killed, imprisoned, sexually abused, our fathers, sons, brothers being killed and incarcerated, our homes being stolen or demolished, denied freedom of movement, and the attempted annihilation and erasure of our community? I ask again, who of us would tolerate this? And who would not attempt to fight back with whatever they had? The Palestinians have been enduring this hell for over 7 decades, and what Israel, its allies and the mainstream are wanting is for Palestinians to suffer and to die quietly. When Palestinians resist non-violently on the streets, when they call for the international community to boycott, divest and sanction Israel, when they ask for the International Criminal Court to investigate Israeli war crimes, they are labelled as problematic and terrorists. And so when some have finally turned to armed resistance, is this not understandable? You don't have to think it is helpful to understand what desperation leads to. Who of us would willingly live on our knees, and who has the right to demand this from others? I looked up the definition of terrorism in a dictionary the other day. It stated the unlawful use of violence or threats to intimidate or coerce a civilian population or government with the goal of furthering political, social or ideological objectives. So who is it are the terrorists here? Which group is it that fits this definition? Is it the Palestinians struggling just to exist and demand rolled by the United States to the sum of 3.8 billion a year, and how dare you pretend there is? So to our friends of Palestine, I say, we hear you. We stand in solidarity with you, and we will keep amplifying out your voices until you are free and there is a just peace for all, built on freedom, justice and equality. I ask you, friends, to join me to do all that you can to free Palestine, free Gaza. It is long past time to end Israeli immunity. It is long past time to end Israeli apartheid.